Is the twin flame dynamic actually a trauma bond? Now, I wanted to make today's message regarding this question because there seems to be a lot of videos that are coming out on labeling the twin flame dynamic as a trauma bond. And, there's all sorts of perspectives out there. There's lots of information and misinformation on the internet about the twin flame dynamic because, as I would say, for the last couple of years, the twin flame dynamic has really become this little buzzword. People want to be twin flames, they think they're in twin flame connection, but this is a very different dynamic, and it has been designed, by the divine in a very unique way. And you cannot compare this dynamic as a trauma bond. So I just wanted to make this video to kind of cover what a trauma bond really is and how it's different from the twin flame connection. Now, first off, I think I want to really talk about what a trauma bond actually is for anybody that's not really understanding that. This term actually was created or first introduced by Patrick Carnes. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. Back in 1997. And really, this has to do with any emotional ties that an individual may have or develop in relationships. And this doesn't always have to be a love relationship when we're talking about trauma bonds. It can be a parent-child relationship. It can be power dynamics. It can be, so many different relationships out there. Doesn't always have to be a loved one. Meanwhile, a twin flame dynamic only applies to a divine partner or a divine counterpart that we're talking about, where we're talking about two parts to, as one whole that are meant to do their inner work and actually come together. So two very different things. But essentially, a trauma bond is when you develop these relationships and they involve some form of betrayal, abuse, exploitation, and there is a victim in that dynamic that is almost dependent on the addiction of going back to that same connection over and over because they seem to get pain and pleasure from that same source. Okay? So I understand that there's an intensity to the twin flame dynamic, which may make people think that it's the same thing. And I kind of blame the overwhelm of the information that's out there about the twin flame dynamic that really causes, people to really be like, what is this connection? Not to mention the runner chaser aspect of it and so much misinformation around that, which makes you think the intensity and that runner chaser dynamic is very, very similar to a trauma bond. But these are not the same thing, so I just kind of wanted to clarify that. Now, a key thing for anybody dealing with a twin flame dynamic or thinking that they're in a twin flame dynamic to really understand here is that if there is any abuse, exploitation, serious betrayal, and intentional betrayal is probably the better word, caused by that, other individual that you're dealing with, this is not a twin flame connection because a twin flame has no intention to hurt you. Now, why this connection in a twin flame dynamic, why it's set up in a way where one is running and one is chasing is strictly because they are meant to show each other what they have to heal within themselves to change their vibration, to change their frequency so that they can finally come back together in union. Now, with that being said, it also is true that the twin flame dynamic is leading you towards spirituality. It's forcing you to go within, to go explore your own self, come home to your own self, really come into union with your own self. And then you end up having this, connection with somebody outside of you. Now, there is a second aspect to this, which a lot of people may not understand, is that in the twin flame or on the twin flame journey, sometimes who you meet initially is not your twin flame. As much as you may not understand that right away, you may have a catalyst that comes in to disrupt you, to really show you your wounding so that you can go on this healing journey. And later on is when your, divine counterpart or your twin flame that really comes in for union. Now, again, as I mentioned, this dynamic is really designed in such a way. Not all dynamics will follow this sort of a pattern, especially a trauma bond doesn't necessarily lead to somebody's spiritual growth or personal growth. It's supposed to do that. Many lessons in our life are supposed to do that for us generally. That's what the purpose of being human is we are meant to evolve on a humanly level, expand our consciousness from all the experiences that we go through. But it is not guaranteed that you're going to move towards spirituality right away, right? When you're dealing with a trauma bond, you are meant to learn from that situation that you're going through, but you may be stuck in a cycle over and over. Versus the cycle that twin flames experience is very, very different. So I just kind of wanted to really draw some of these comparisons so that people can really understand, because I feel like there's people on the internet that actually aren't twin flames themselves that are even trying to explain this. And sometimes they're dealing with the catalyst when they're trying to explain this, so it doesn't really work. So hopefully this makes it a little bit clearer. So again, for anybody that may come across, information, especially if you're a twin flame and you're just trying to understand the journey and you see this connection as a trauma bond, understand that, first of all, you got to understand what a twin flame dynamic is. You got to understand the cycle that you really go through on this, because it looks very different than a trauma bonding cycle, which is where you keep going back to experience that same pain over and over because you're addicted to it. Versus in a twin flame dynamic, what you're really doing is when you're approaching, and it's the person who's usually approaching is the chaser in this dynamic, the feminine energy approaching the masculine energy, and they're approaching the runner. But the runner runs because there's something that the chaser makes them feel that they're not yet ready to face. They have to go on their healing journey, heal from whatever it is from their past. There's a trauma there. But nowhere in that dynamic is there, necessity or you can almost say this desire for one to hurt the other. There is no physical abuse. There should be no verbal abuse. So very, very different. There is a curiosity on the part of the chaser. That is why they chase after the runner. And the runner is simply running because they're not yet ready to face what the chaser is trying to show them, because they act as mirrors for each other. So hopefully the next time you come across this sort of information, you're really able to dissect it in that part. Now, where somebody might be able to say it is a trauma bond is simply because there is healing to do in the twin flame dynamic. And the twins can actually come together until that healing work is done. So yes, it could be true to say that, they're bonding together because there's a trauma there. It's not the actual definition, what a trauma bond really is that can be applied. But it is also true that both twins have their own trauma to really work through. But overall, if you really compare the two dynamics, they are very, very different in nature and have some major differences. So the next time you really hear about this, hopefully you can tell them apart. Thank you so much for listening. I really hope this was helpful. God bless.